Welcome, everyone. As you're joining us, if you want to tell us where you're joining us from in the chat, that would be great.
Hello. I'll just
Hello.
be listening. If y'all need me for anything.
Sounds good. Looks like we've got a wide variety of places, which is great. Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, Oregon, Arkansas, North Carolina. I'm in Indiana, everybody. We'll get started in just a few minutes. That's a great question. Yes, we are recording this session. It will be available to everyone that registered. We will send an email. It'll also be available on our website, and we will share it in our next issue of FLA Focus, which is our e-newsletter. For those of you just joining us, everyone in this meeting will be muted. As this is a webinar, how this works is if you have questions, you'll type them in the chat or the Q&A, and at the end of the session, Ben or Mark will answer those questions for you. Also, feel free to send any other important messages in the chat and let us know where you are joining us from. All right, it is officially 2 o'clock, so we're going to get started. I am Michelle Kane. I am the Director of Communications for Forest Landowners Association and Foundation. I'm currently located in Fishers, Indiana, so if you're not used to the cold weather that you may be experiencing now, welcome to the weather that is normally Indiana. I apologize. On a serious note, I'm very excited for this webinar today. We are joined by Ben Maddox and Mark Foley from Acres, who will be explaining all that Acres has to offer as far as looking at quality land data and really making it easy to understand. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to Ben to get us started. Thank you so much.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Mark and I are excited to be here. Obviously, we're going to be speaking about GIS, or generally mapping and data tools that are available to timberland owners. And so we'll get into sort of what's available today on the market, as well as our product, Acres, and how it fits within that broader range of options for landowners. So you see a brief agenda here. We'll do bios here in just a second. We'll get into some timber site evaluation basics. My colleague Mark is going to walk you through that. He's got an extensive history of buying, managing, and selling timberland properties. And then we'll do a brief live demo as well, followed by a Q&A. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what we hope to cover today. It's an ambitious agenda for 30 minutes, but we'll get through it all, I'm confident. So moving into introductions, briefly again, I'm Ben Maddox. My background is I'm an accredited farm manager and accredited land consultant. I've worked on the buy side of a number of acquisitions, both in farm and timberland, but everything I know about timberland, I've learned from my colleague Mark. So I'll let him introduce himself briefly before moving on to our first slide.
Thank you, Ben. Mark Foley, I'm based in Atlanta. I started in Timberland at GMO under Jeremy Grantham, managing institutional money, timber funds, large separate accounts, moved across to US Trust, Bank of America, managing separate account portfolios for the clients of Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. Moved down to Atlanta and worked at Domain for almost 4 years in the TIMO business again, and then came across to Acres to help build out their timberland platform for the high net worth investor.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark. This next slide, I'm going to hand it back to you, Mark, but just to set the context, I think you kind of want to walk us through what are the basic things that you've looked at when you're evaluating properties, and that will sort of segue us into what are the tools available to find these discrete data points.
So when I get sent a property, either from a broker or a landowner, or just a straight up phone call from somebody, it's like, so what type of property am I dealing with? Size, where it's located. Then I want to understand the market that property is in, where my processing facilities are, sawmills, hardwood, softwood, pulp and paper. Is there an export opportunity, chip? Then I also want to understand the species mix. Is it hardwood, softwood? Is it a mix? I want to sort of extract as much information as I can from the individual who's bringing me this deal or this opportunity, to really understand how I should be approaching my due diligence and the type of questions I should be asking, type of information I should be hopefully getting from the seller if they have it. Even today, I just get sometimes sent a scanned, hand-drawn map. This is the piece of property that I'm selling. It's 500 acres in South Carolina. Are you interested? Well, what can you tell me about it? Well, there's trees on it. Well, okay. Do you have access to the property? And what are the trees? Are they pine trees? Did you plant them? Is it natural? So there's a whole range of sort of due diligence items on my list that I go through even before I start to do the financial analysis. I want to understand as much as I can about the property before I even want to get out and visit it.
And I think, Mark, one of the things we want to talk about is that whole list of items you're going through, your checklist. A lot of people are using different tools to capture that data, synthesize the data, and manage the data, right?
Correct.
And you have here on this slide, what are the traditional solutions to solving this problem? Obviously, we have paper and printed maps, but the two most popular digital ones in the past have been an ArcGIS or a Google Earth type approach. And while we won't spend much time discussing those solutions today, it is worth noting a few of the common issues with these solutions, right? So the largest complaint when I talk to landowners or industry folks is that using these tools requires a lot of specialized knowledge. It can be expensive to maintain, and it still sometimes doesn't do everything you want after you've gone through the trials and tribulations of getting it set up. So, before we go into how the Acres platform, which is our product, addresses some of those concerns, Mark, I think you actually have a few actual examples of past properties you've worked on that kind of highlight some of the issues in working with both paper and printed maps and some of these other products.
Correct. So these are just examples of information that I've received when I've had either a timberland appraisal done or that's been sent to me from a landowner. As you can sort of see here, we're dealing with static sort of display. Often material is black and white. The maps are not uniform. Scale is difficult to interpret. The trying to pick out the information where the property is, again, is difficult. Often these are dated and not necessarily that easy for me to use in their form, which means I have to go to another format or another program or another piece of software to try then to piece together the information that they've sent me.
And Mark, as we're going through these, this is information you might receive for real estate listing on multi-million-dollar tracts, right? Like this is still using paper maps in some cases.
Yes, we had a transaction last year that had been in the family for over 80 years, and they had enough. They knew they owned this property, but they didn't have a survey. They didn't have any timber information. They weren't sure how to get access to it, and no one had been on the property in over 30 years walking it. So and sometimes that's often typical in the deal size that I work in, which is sort of that $20 million and below. But as you can sort of see here, over time, a lot of information wasn't even available for certain counties that I've been looking or where I own property. And when I was at, for example, GMO, the maps are dated. The maps are not necessarily that useful. There's no sort of insights that I can really pull from there. It's like, okay, it just gives me more questions that I need to get answered rather than providing me with answers to my questions.
And speaking of insights, I think on this next one, we have some information that's obviously relevant to our audience today, but is an example of, we're starting to digitize some things. We're starting to get a bit more advanced, but still there's some information lacking in here.
Yes. And often it still requires me as the person doing the due diligence to really start, okay, where's my property located in relevance to all these mills? And then I have to start digging into other data sets to find information about those mills. Is it closed? Is it open? Is it a hardwood mill when I've got a softwood property, or vice versa? What's the distance? What is the terrain like around these particular regions? And it's just often requires me as the investment manager to do more digging, go into multiple different pieces of software, different programs, and trying to piece together a puzzle that is often complicated and time-consuming to build.
Yeah, I saw a few heads nodding. I guess there's some people empathizing with the difficulty of using some of this information. The last slide we have on sort of, maybe you call it the before scenario, which is what is it like working with some of these existing products, is comparable sales, right? And the title of our webinar today is, valuing land as well as managing it. And so comparable sales are critically important when valuing land. And Mark, I think this was just one data table you had, but as you highlight here, it's static. It doesn't give you a map of where these comparable sales are. You just kind of know it's in these counties, right?
Yes. And one of the first things I want to do with a comparable sale is, even though there's a significant amount of information contained in this table, I want to actually, it would be great just to get out and highlight the property. Why is this particular property, the appraiser is saying it's above or below the property that I own? Do I go back and ask the appraiser holistic questions, or can I do a lot of the evaluation myself by knowing where the property is, the site index, does it have better access than my property? What's the topography like? Where is it in relation to my property? Is this somebody that I could approach to see if they have outliers they want to sell, or do I want to approach them about buying their property because it's close to my property? The table is useful, but it again poses more questions than it answers for me in terms of trying to understand the deal that I'm looking at today.
Well, hopefully, we can actually solve some of these problems today in the next 20 minutes, Mark. In contrast to some of the solutions we've discussed so far, we built Acres to be easy to use, cloud-based, mobile-friendly, and up-to-date. So the idea is, how can I have a flexible GIS platform without needing special training or staff to manage it? And so as you'll see in the next few slides, we integrate a number of different solutions into one here, analyzing and researching a particular property, creating property reports and sharing data internally and externally, and finally, conducting valuations of properties, as well as managing a portfolio of land. So looking at that first category or that first group of solutions, this idea of how do I analyze and research at a parcel or subparcel level, here's a couple of the high-level data queries you can run inside of the system. You're going to see all this in real time in just a moment when we do a demo, but the idea is that we want to have everything in one place in a clean and easy interface that rapidly increases the speed of researching a property. So the goal is to make everyone move a little bit faster. For anyone who has spent hours combing through poorly designed county tax assessor websites, we built this one for you. So you'll see this in real time in just a moment. The next sort of function that we see people use is this sharing, uploading, exporting data. So the image on the right of this slide is actually a screenshot from our mobile app. And the reason for highlighting that is to emphasize the fact that we want to make using your data easier in the office, in the field, and when you want to share it with others. So you can export information outside of our platform to KML and KMZ, custom shareable links, Excel and PDF, and a few other options as well. And then finally, conducting valuations and managing a portfolio. The analysis often needs to go beyond just the parcel level. And so Acres allows you to come in and value your properties and portfolio using embedded transaction data. This makes it easier to run, say, like a market area report and then send that to a partner or client. But you can also filter and view all of your saved properties based on searchable categories. Maybe you want to search by the year you planted some trees on a property, or the tree type, or the client name, or the project status. All these are flexible search criteria that you can organize your land by. This allows you to collaborate in real time on properties. Before we move to the demo, there are 2 additional data fields going beyond our general capabilities that are specific to Timberland owners that I think we should probably highlight. First, here on the screen, we have the timber site index. So we visualize timber site index inside of our application, and then that allows you to measure the parcel and site productivity in just a few seconds. So I'll show you how that works. You can use this on mobile and desktop, or you can print it out to a PDF to take with you on the road or share with a client. And then finally, one of the things we're most proud of, we have partnered with Forest to visualize their mill database inside of Acres. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Forest. They're an industry leader in data and research. The mill database provides information on location, capacity, wood use, and important details like announced and planned new capacity. Current subscribers to the Forest mill database can actually access this data inside of Acres. If you want more information on that after the webinar, please follow up with us. Be happy to make the appropriate introductions. You will also see how this works in our demo, which is coming up next. So let me change my screen here briefly. And you should be able to see now a map of the United States. Mark, did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So if you've ever used any sort of GIS product before, whether it be browser-based or desktop-based, this is going to look pretty intuitive and familiar. The first thing I'll do, though, is everyone wants to find their parcel of interest or their property of interest. One of the nice parts about our system is you can search by any category at all: owner name, entity name, owner's address, parcel ID. So let's start with an owner address search. And the reason I like to do this is that you can search the entire United States. And it's going to show you properties in all 3,100 some odd counties in the US. So let's do one that's close to home for me. So we'll do 112 West Center Street. And here is a map of 200 parcels that belong to AcreTrader. So this is important because we've done 2 things when we did this search. The first thing we did is we actually mapped a portfolio, right? So this could be any individual person, it could be an institutional landowner, you name it, but you can map by state and by county where all their land holdings are. The second important thing is we now know all the different entities that are in use across the portfolio. And by searching via address, we don't have to guess at all these entity names. So that's a really critical function. Well, let's actually take a look at one of these. I think this is probably a property Mark worked on before. Let's just select this and do a quick property analysis, because that was that first item that we said you can do inside of the platform. So now that we have a parcel selected, there's a couple of things we can do. The first thing we can do is obviously just get details about that parcel, right? So it's in Drew County. Here's the parcel number, assessed value, and some information about the owner. Moving beyond that is what we call our GIS toolbox. So in here, you can get a number of pieces of information. Let's look at FEMA floodlands and national wetlands. So this is a really useful map because obviously I know now where the floodplain is, and it's going to tell me something about site operability if I'm conducting diligence on a parcel. Beyond that, we're obviously going to have elements of elevation in there. So you can quickly conduct an elevation map and get the topography. But you can also jump in and do things like get the property tax on that parcel for the last 10 years, as well as looking at, just generally what are the soils on that property. I mentioned timber site index a couple of times. I'll populate that now, and you'll see we need to select what kind of tree type we're analyzing this property for. So let's go ahead and select loblolly pine, and you'll see I've instantly got a report on the aggregate site index for this property for productivity of loblolly pine. So now I have an objective measure of site productivity for this particular tree species. I, of course, could switch my different tree species and get a report for each of them as well. Once I've kind of gone through and used this GIS toolbox, there's a second thing I might investigate, which is simply how do I value this property, right? So if I want to think about valuing it, I'm going to go look at comparable sales data. So you'll see here, we have a number of sales results populating in the map. And what I might do is actually come in here and say, well, I want to filter sales by a certain radius around my property, and I want to filter by certain dates of the sale. So I can hit apply, and instantly I've got a subset of sales available to me. And I can go through here and take a look at each of them and say, do I think this is a good sale result as a comparable to my property? So this is a great one, right? We've got the sale result here, the price per acre. We've got some content here. Tells me it's planted pine and mature hardwoods with additional detail. And I know what date it sold right up here at the top. And so if I'm conducting a valuation on our 318 acres over here in the top right, I might say that this is a good comparable sale. So I'll begin by adding it to our, think of it kind of like a shopping cart over here. And you can just go through and add additional transactions until you have as many as you'd like. So we'll just say these 3 are good enough. We've got 3 sales now, and we'll actually hit save. And when I go to save, we'll call this the test property, and we'll save it. And so the benefit of saving your property in here is that you can then go to this dashboard. And this dashboard is a great place to look at all the properties you might be working on and take a deeper look at them. So here's the test farm in Drew County, Arkansas. We saved it, and it tells us that, okay, here's your subject property, and here are the average prices paid per acre for the comparable sales that you saved with your subject property. So in 30 seconds, we identified the subject in Drew County. We found comparable sales data. We saved that comparable sales data, and we've more or less built a valuation for that farm using recent sales data. The nice part about this is you can export that to Excel. So if you want to do a market analysis and say, what's the trend for land values in a given area, you can run that and export it. But you can also create a PDF report for any property. So here's actually a property I ran a previous report on in Georgia. So you'll just get a sense of, hey, what does the PDF export look like? The first page has some information about the parcel. The second has more detail from the county. You'll see this is in Georgia. So we actually have Forest Land Protection Act noted in there. That's really helpful, obviously, if you're working in the state of Georgia to have that information. But you also get some owner address data. Moving through here, you'll get your elevation map. You'll get a crop history map, which of course is Timberland. You'll get a FEMA wetlands map, satellite imagery. You'll get the timber site index report. And then lastly, you're going to get the property valuation. So this is just like we ran through in real time. I have all the comparable sales mapped surrounding my subject property. and just a simple average price per acre available to me as the user of this report. And of course, I could print this, I could share it with anyone, but the idea is how can I quickly build these reports and make it easily and intuitively shareable internally and externally, which is a great sort of last jumping off point, which is we mentioned this idea of managing a portfolio. And here we have a bunch of saved properties. If I go in here and say, well, I actually want to sort by everything that was planted in, let's say, 2010, I can click 2010 short leaf plantings. It's going to give me a national map of all the properties that have been labeled with that. So this label is completely customizable. It could say, properties that we're currently selling. It could say properties we'd like to buy. You can label it however you like, but the point is your team can come in here and actually label everything and sort the portfolio by various sort of metrics that are relevant to your business. And so for you guys who have multiple team members, you'd come in here, everyone would have an account, and you would simply have individual users saving properties, tagging them essentially with the labels, saving documents, and creating notes. And so that notes piece is the last thing I'm going to cover. We're going to take a look at this saved property. So I've gone from the portfolio view over here to the on the map view. And this is where you can actually come in and do this concept of customizing. And this is the last thing I'll show you on our demo before we take questions. But now that we have our property pulled up, you'll see that I've annotated it, right? There's some icons, logos, boundaries on here. If I come in here and click on this boundary, for example, it's going to tell me this is 18 acres of hardwoods. And then if I come in and click on this one over here, I'll see that that's actually a survey pin. And lo and behold, there is a photo of that survey pin stored in that map. And so this is the kind of thing that you can build with your team and then send externally to third parties so that it's going to give someone who is looking at this property from a distance a sense of what's actually going on the property. So in this case, we have a cabin and we have a photo of the cabin. So you can send these dynamic links externally outside of your organization, or of course, sharing internally. So this is a good example of how your team could collaborate on managing a property. Because this application works on a mobile device as well, you can take photos in the field and you'll be able to upload those photos to these icons. So it's a more, doing a timber cruise is a more effective practice when I can send some of that information back to the office at a desktop level. Mark, I think that concludes everything I had to walk folks through. I'll take a look at the chat to see if we have any questions and answers coming in yet.
That last feature you were just talking about, Ben, and the ability to, this is sort of being able to be used on a mobile, is when you're managing properties on behalf of somebody else, and they may live in New York or San Francisco, and you're out there doing a thinning or a final harvest or a replanting, you can send them an update on their property. We're out there today, first load of logs going off to the sawmill, or the trees have just been replanted. We've just repaired this bridge, put a new culvert in, a new set of gates went on, and it gives the client I think a better understanding of what you as the manager, or what I as the manager are doing, better than just a paper report. They can click on the link and go on a little tour of the property from their office.
Yeah, the virtual tour is kind of the concept, right?
Yeah.
And I realized as we were moving through there, I didn't actually cover the Forest Mill database. So I'll backtrack a little bit as the questions come in and just show you briefly. If you go into this GIS Insights bar and you just hit Timber Mills, it's right here. You'll see Forest Consulting, just click on that. And basically what you'll get is a national map of the mill database. And so it'll populate on this map and you'll be able to sort by these different fields here. So if you want to look for certain types of mills, mills that have closed or mills that are announced, or you might just say, you know what, I want to look for mills that are within 65 miles of my subject property. And you just do that and it automatically filters it, right? So my subject is here in the middle in blue. And then I have all these mills within 65 miles. If I click on one of them, let's just click the one at the top, and I go to it, I'll see, okay, I've identified the mill location. I know what type of mill this is, certifications it might possess, and I also have historical capacity of that mill. And this is all available to you sort of at the click of a button. You do need to be a Forest Mill Database subscriber to access it, but it lives inside of the Acres platform here, so that as you're doing property diligence, you also have access to this important information as well. So I apologize for not covering that the first time around, but that's how it works. And it looks like we actually have a couple of questions here. So I will take the first one. Where do you source your sales data, and is there a verification process? Great question. So we get sales data from essentially two sources. The first source would be county tax assessors. We get that in what I call our cadastral data set. So parcel data, parcel owner, sales data or transfer records really for that parcel. And that's one of our data sets. So we're going to have that inside of our system for the lower 48 states. We have an additional data layer that is actually provided by industry experts. So as you might imagine, we have any number of land professionals utilizing our platform, from brokers to appraisers to bankers. And some of those individuals are actually contributing data into our database and making it a more reliable system. So we're getting data from the county courthouse itself and from brokers and lenders and appraisers who are utilizing our platform. So I hope that answers the question. There's a question about how often is that county data updated. So it does depend on the county. We require them to obviously digitize their records and send them to us. But typically we are updating our system every single month. So we're going to go reach in and pull for new updates on a monthly basis for 150 million parcels. We are reliant on the county to play nice and update their records, but we're pulling it every single month. Let's see, there's a question here. When you add photos and other information, is that available only internally to your team or everyone who has a license? So when you're working inside of this application, there's a default presumption that everything is private, right? So we start off with everything is private to your organization or team. So nobody else can see that information. Obviously, it's nice that you can take us for our word, but we'll also go through a regular data privacy audit. It's called SOC 2, SOC2, which is essentially it's the highest standard for data privacy. And it's used throughout really the banking industry. And because we have so many lending clients, we did go ahead and pursue that. So we are audited for our data privacy compliance. Mark, there's a couple questions. I'll send one over to you. A couple people asking sort of thematically the same thing. How might you be able to identify the age, density, and timber stand on a parcel of land? And I'll give my brief answer, and then I'm kind of curious in your experience how you've done this. If you don't have access to, say, a ton of records about the property, zooming in on, let's just pick any random parcel here on the screen, zooming in here, I might come in and say, well, let's pick this one. And if I go to historical imagery in here, which we typically provide data going back to 2010, I can look at land use changes on this property over time. And that's going to tell me, did we plant trees? Did we cut trees? And if we planted them, I got sort of a rough sense of the year that occurred because I can flip through time and look at land use change. But Mark, do you have a better answer for the best way in establishing the age of trees from let's just assume we're remotely evaluating a property?
No, what you've described is really the best way, but that's part of the due diligence questions that I have for the landowner is what has happened to a particular property? Is it being managed, or is it just being hunted on and sort of no professional management undertaken on the property, so no thinnings or anything like that going on? That is still one of the big pieces of the puzzle, is trying to get that 3D piece of the puzzle in the sense of without satellite imagery, trying to distinguish what activity has been taken on the property. What I have found it very useful for is the satellite imagery to see if there's been any incidences of disturbance outside of the harvesting that I undertake on the property. So
yeah, Mark, I found I found a site of disturbance here.
Yeah.
So this one's pretty stark between 2016 and 2018. So I think that's a good
Yeah.
use case right there of, I might go back in future years and say, did they replant that? And then I can
Yes.
estimate age. But really, that's the best way you can go about sort of triangulating an answer. And I just looked at the time. It is 1:30. We've got a few questions. I told our host that we would answer everything in a follow-up email if we didn't get to it during the call. So
And
I
you're
apologize.
fine. No, you're fine. You keep answering questions as long as you want, as long as you all have the time.
Let's take, how about we take 3 more, something like that. So there's a question in here about pricing. So great question. Our product is available in different tiers, as you might imagine. So there's a free, and then there's, if you have a large amount of land, we call that generally our enterprise level. If you want more information on pricing, simply contact us after the call. We could walk you through. It really just depends on, am I talking, is it a 1-person team or a 10-person team, right? So everything sort of depends on the total number of users involved. But you can go to our website, which is just acres.com, and you'll get more information about pricing there. We'll obviously happy to talk to you after the call as well. So question here, what about timber sales that are recorded? Do you pull that data in addition to property sales data? I think maybe this question meant to ask timber sales that are not recorded with the county. Obviously, there's a lot of timberland that lies within non-disclosure states or partial disclosure states, Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas, for example. And so to answer that question about timber sales that do not get recorded with the county, that's one of the reasons that we have a sold land layer that relies both on the county tax assessor and on what I referred to as land experts, right? So who are the brokers, who are the lenders, who are the appraisers who are working in this industry, and they might have additional data to complete the public record, right? So we know there are gaps in certain non-disclosure states, and we're making efforts to close that gap by bringing in additional data sets. Let's see. There's a question about how is this different from other competing products. So, we had an early slide on that, talking about things like ArcGIS, Google Earth. When compared to those systems, obviously we hope to be easy to use, as I mentioned, cloud-based and mobile friendly. And the idea is that you don't need to be an expert or have take a college class to teach yourself how to use it. And there are also other off-the-shelf products. And I think one of the things Mark and I have really focused on is how can we make this not only relevant to farmers and ranchers, which is a huge customer demographic of ours, but how can we also make it relevant for timberland owners? And I think you see that through the timber site index data, as well as the mill data that we have inside of our application. Our goal is to be relevant for you all, essentially, everyone on this webinar, and not just farmers and ranchers, which I feel like a lot of the other products have tend to focus mainly on those two audiences.
I have a quick question for you. What kind of training goes along with purchasing this software for someone that may not be real savvy with GIS or just any application like this?
Yeah, great question. Fortunately or unfortunately, you get to talk to me. So if you sign up, we'll obviously walk you through getting an account created, how do you actually use the product, and we're available for as many training sessions as needed. So we talk to most of our customers on a quarterly basis. If for whatever reason you feel like, hey, you know what, I'd like someone to come talk to the whole firm or the whole family, we can certainly do that for anyone who's using our enterprise product. That's just sort of part of the service. It's a common question. And again, the goal here was, how do we make it so that I tried to teach myself how to actually use ArcGIS. It was not the most successful experiment. And I wanted something as a user that I can just turn on, open up every day and start working, right? And I didn't want to have to, essentially go get a college degree to use it.
Yep.
All right, I don't see a lot of new questions coming in. So with that, maybe we go ahead and conclude, and we'll take follow-up questions via email. I want to make sure we get an answer to everybody, but just really appreciate our host today and for all of you attending, and hope to talk to you all again soon.
Thank you very much. It's very informative.